Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining another webinar hosted by the Washington Kurdish Institute, the WKI. My name is Yousif Ismael. I'm the Director of Media and Policy. And thankfully, under the leadership of our President of WKI, Dr. Najmuddin Karim, we continue to host good discussions and webinars and deliver the Kurdish voice to Washington. As you know, today's panel is an important one. It's about Turkey's expansionism policy and whether it's Erdogan's or Turkey's. Alongside that big question, there are other questions that could be asked, and that includes whether it's beneficial for Turkey's long or short-term interest, and whether it has the backing of the opposition. And if not, how could the opposition create alliances in 2023 to defeat Erdogan, including the Kurds? Would they be kingmakers again? Many more questions will be addressed to our distinguished speakers. We all know that Turkey is involved in many states, including in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, Eastern Mediterranean, and the list goes on, supporting also non-state actors, including Musilm Brotherhood and Hamas in Palestine and Israel conflict, and more. So I am very privileged and honored that the WKI was able to get another group of prominent experts on this topic, and that includes Mr. Alan Makovsky, who is a senior fellow for national security and international policy at the Center for American Progress, CAP. Mr. Makovsky worked at the Department of State at the Bureau of Intelligence and Research from 1983 to 1994. In addition, in 1992, he was the advisor for Operation Provide Comfort, also known for Iraqi Kurds as the no-fly zone, which saved millions of Kurdish lives. And we are thankful for that. And we are happy that he did that amazing work that saved Kurdish lives. After that, he joined the Washington Institute for Near East Policy until 2001, where he founded and directed the Turkey's research program, and later became a professional staff member on the Foreign Relations Committee in the House of the Representatives. Alan has decades of experience in European affairs, specifically on Turkey, also with the Kurdish issue, and we are very honored to have him here. And Alan, thank you for accepting this invitation. We appreciate you being with us today. Next, we have Dr. Gallia Lindenstrauss, who is a senior research fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies, focusing on Turkey's foreign policies, which is foreign affairs, which is a perfect match for today's discussion. Dr. Lindenstrauss is her work and her extensive work on the topic appeared in Israel, in American and international media. She also focuses on the Kurdish issue, on the Cyprus issue, and Azerbaijan's foreign policy, and many more topics related to the region. She also was a visiting fellow at the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington. That's where I first participated in her panel in 2017. And she has PhD in international relations from the Hebrew University. Thank you, Doctor, for joining us. And as usual, we'll take your Q&A. We'll take your questions during Q&A. I'm happy to enable your mic. You can ask our guest directly or in writing if you can submit it on your screen. And without further ado, I'm very excited to let Mr. Makovsky start this panel. Alan, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Yousif. And thank you for mentioning my work on Operation Provide Comfort. It was probably the most satisfying job I had in all my years in government. Well, I'd like to compliment you, Yousif, on setting up this panel on a very interesting topic which has no clear answer, but which is very important for us to discuss. And I also just want to say how honored I am to be on a panel with Gallia, from whose writings I follow avidly, from whom I've learned so much, and if I may say, at least from my own point of view, who I became a real friend during the year that she spent in Washington at the Bipartisan Policy Center. A really wonderful person. Look, this issue of, is it Erdogan's policy or is it Turkey's? I've divided it up into three questions because I think it really encompasses these three questions. How much support do Erdogan's policies receive from the Turkish public and from other parties? Second, to what extent do Turkey's circumstances dictate Erdogan's policies rather than Erdogan's simple predilections? To how much is he just reflecting a policy that Turkey would anyway follow? And lastly, what do these answers tell us about what a post-Erdogan foreign policy would look like? Look, I think regarding support for Erdogan's policies, particularly some of his signature policies, I think the reaction of the Turkish public is very mixed, which is heartening, really. I base a lot of this on recent polling. I'm an avid poll follower. I follow Metropol. And also I would recommend to anyone who's not familiar with it, Qatar University in Istanbul does an annual survey of foreign policy perceptions. This year's they usually conduct it in the spring. They conducted it in April. I don't like to overemphasize polls, but I mean, they do give an important snapshot. And I'll try to put it in some context. First of all, as I said, on many of his signature policies, there's very mixed feelings. The general issue of cross-border operations, Turks favor them only by 41 to 35. Overseas bases, only 37 to 36 in favor. In both cases, 20% of AK Party voters are opposed. When you ask Turks, or when Turks were asked in the spring, what is your preferred approach in Syria? The number one answer, 38%, was stay out, remain neutral. By 36 to 32, Turks favor meeting with the Assad government, which goes completely counter to the approach Erdogan has taken. And that, by the way, for most of these questions, the breakdown is that those who vote for AK Party and for MHP are on the aggressive side of the issue, and CHP, HDP, and EE Party with some mixed reaction is on the other side. But actually, on the issue of meeting with Assad, it's pretty much the same by every party right down the line. You know, there's a slight majority of AK Party voters against it and a slight majority of CHP voters in favor of it. On the issue of Hamas, approve or disapprove, Pew Research has been polling this question for many years, going back to the beginning of the century. And I think many people who follow Turkish policy would be astonished to learn that by overwhelming numbers, Turks disapprove of Hamas. 80 to 8 in the most recent one that I could find, which was from 2014 or 2015, 2014, I believe. But it's consistent enough over the years. The early part of the century, when AK Party first took over, the disapproval was in the 90s, sometimes well into the 90s. So I think we can say that, you know, Hamas itself does not evoke great love on the part of the Turkish people. The Palestine issue does. There's high disapproval of Israel, but Hamas itself, no. Erdogan's specific cross-border operations into Syria tend to garner initial support and then they decline in popularity. Libya followed somewhat the opposite path. Actually, initially, it was military intervention was opposed, and then if 3 months later, according to a Metropol survey, it was approved, overwhelmingly actually, 2-1, 58 to 29. But that may be because Turks actually saw a lot of positive benefits that they didn't see at the beginning from that operation. In short, there's no Turkish consensus at this point on Erdogan's more aggressive policies. That's not to say that those policies will be halted. On the contrary, I think they're likely to continue. They have the support of most AK Party and MHP voters, as I said, and those are the voters that Erdogan is counting on to win his next term as president. And Erdogan's powers to pursue these policies are essentially unchecked. But it is to say that a new leadership could soften or alter many of these policies and still easily manage public opinion. How am I doing on time, Yousif? Yousif? You know something, I can't hear.
Yeah, you're fine, you're fine.
Okay,
Yeah,
so I just wanted to mention, you know, I think one thing that's sometimes forgotten when talking about Erdogan's policies are the changed circumstances in Turkey. Maybe this is truer of the old fogies like me, you know, who go way back on Turkish-US relations and remember, you know, the days when Turkey was a highly dependent country. Look, Turkey is no longer the third world country that came to the US as a supplicant for support and, you know, after the Stalin letter in 1945. It was, you know, back in the early days, it was seen as a low income country. I think by World Bank rankings in 1955, it was upgraded to low middle income, but it was very dependent on the United States and for security, for even economic aid. It's really not even the country that it was when Erdogan took over in November, when AK Party took over in November 2002. It's much stronger economically and militarily. It's now under the first 7 years of the AK Party rule, per capita income increased from roughly 3,500 to 10,000. It was upgraded to a high middle income country. Turkey now produces some very sophisticated military equipment, including armed drones. I remember when I worked on Capitol Hill, it wanted to buy armed drones from the United States, and the United States wasn't selling armed drones in those days. Of course, drones technology is better known now than it was a decade ago, but still, there's no doubt that Turkish drone technology turned around the fighting in Libya. Next year, the Turks say they're coming forward with a light aircraft carrier. They're definitely building up their navy. This goes back to the US embargo, 1975-78, when after which Turkey decided they had to develop their own indigenous industry. They've done that. They're not totally militarily independent by any means, but they're now a net military exporter. They're one of the top 15 in the world. It's grown in relative strength to virtually all its immediate neighbors. And in short, Turkey is now capable of throwing its weight around, and it does. The opposition actively backs Erdogan on many issues, on Hellenic issues. Sometimes it even chides him for being too weak on those issues. It rarely confronts him on other issues, although to be fair, it did vote against the authorization of the Libya intervention. But as a subjective impression, which I could elaborate on, I think even many of Erdogan's opponents are now used to the idea of Turkey's active intervention in the Middle East, an idea that they long shunned. I mean, when I was coming up as a Turkish, and not just when I was coming up, well into my years as a Turkish analyst, it was a cornerstone belief that Turkey wanted to have nothing to do with the Middle East. It could give many examples of how Turkey's self-confidence has increased. Look, Turkey may overplay its hand, and it may pay dearly for its isolation. A remarkable number of regional countries have condemned Turkish bullying in recent months, including the Arab League and 7 EU Mediterranean states. Other regional groupings have taken similar stances, but for now, it's enhanced its standing as a regional power to be reckoned with. So what happens next? So what does this mean for a post-Erdogan policy? Look, a lot of that depends on who replaces him and when. An AKP replacement would likely be quite different from a CHP one. Certainly the latter, because the CHP, that is, because of its secularism and its history, would feel more structurally tied to the West, to NATO. It would not be sentimental about the Islamic world. I think it would have nothing to do with Hamas. Also, should add, in considering this question, a more hands-on regional approach by the US could be an important factor in shaping a post-Erdogan foreign policy. Most of the new Turkish aggressiveness, most of it, has taken place during the recent era of benign neglect by the United States. But I think it's important to underline that even if CHP replaces Erdogan and AKP, there will be no restoration of the status quo, of the pre-AKP status quo ante. Turkey's aware of its enhanced power vis-a-vis its neighbors, of the important role Western policymakers still ascribe to it, and of its ability to act independently within reason. And it will be willing to avail itself, within limits, I should say, and it will be willing to avail itself of those advantages when it deems necessary. In short, a post-Erdogan policy could differ from Erdogan's in many respects, but in broad outline, it's likely to resemble Erdogan's approach more than not. And it just, as a last point, I should add that I fear these developments do not augur well, at least in the near term, for a solution to the Kurdish issue. But there are at least a couple of reasons to be optimistic about the Kurdish issue, which I think we can get into. I could get into in Q&A. I'll leave it at that. Thank you. I hope I didn't speak too long.
No, these are wonderful remarks, and I'm sure there will be a few questions about that. And we look forward for Dr. Gallia to have her remarks. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for organizing the event, and thank you for the WKI for inviting me. I'm really honored. And to speak alongside with Alan, who is an intellectual giant, is really it's one of big moments of my career. So I'm really delighted to be here. So I would like to talk more from an international relations perspective. And I think Turkey, after the 2016 failed coup, is in many respects what you would call a revolutionary state. And such states usually cause severe regional instability, both because they perceive themselves as vulnerable and because the other states view the revolutionary state as having revisionist tendencies. The narrative that is coming out of Ankara, the Turkey under Erdogan, became too strong, and hence a coalition of different actors ganged up against it and orchestrated the coup attempt is basically the operating manual of today's Turkey. Clearly, Erdogan and his circle of advisors see certain regional actors, be they the United Arab Emirates, Israel, and different Kurdish actors, as being part of this coalition against Turkey and hence should be stopped. From the other regional actors' perspective, Turkey is seen as conducting an aggressive foreign policy that, if not contained, will only expand. Examples of this are plentiful, and you mentioned a few. Turkey's 3 military interventions in northern Syria, its persistent yet expanding intervention in northern Iraq and its bases, its involvement in Libya, its direct confrontation with Greece and Cyprus. Each new action in this direction only makes the regional actors more concerned. The fact that other actors have been able to form closer relations in recent years, and we see a de facto alliance between Israel, Cyprus, Greece, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt, only reinforces Turkey's threat perception and makes it even more assertive. Many explain the current timing of the normalization agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Israel and Bahrain, especially the timing of it, because this was also a message to Turkey and the global Musilm Brotherhood movement that they have gone too far. Part of Turkey's assertive actions also derive from the fact that in today's international system, it looks as if more assertive actors seem to be able to get away with it. Of course, this is not a completely new development, and it has been true also in earlier periods. But yet, the move from a unipolar system to a multipolar system is clearly a strong consideration in the moves of Erdogan, and Alan referred to this. This manifests itself first and foremost in his attempt to expand Turkey's self-reliance in the defense industry, and Alan elaborated both the drones and the light carrier. But this also manifests itself in the repeating of the slogan that the world is bigger than 5. While Erdogan clearly has ideological beliefs, the revolution I'm talking about when analyzing Turkey after the failed coup is a revolution surrounding a very specific person. Erdogan can do significant policy U-turns and the revolution mode would still remain intact. Economic troubles may make the citizens in Turkey miserable, but will not restrain the revolutionary mode of conduct. It might in fact only cause Erdogan to be more assertive in his foreign policy, since it's beneficial both in terms of catering to the nationalist voters and is also a classical finding of a scapegoat policy. The Corona challenge has not stopped till now Turkey's assertive foreign policy. On the contrary, if one would look only at Turkish actions, it would be hard to guess that all of this is happening in the middle of a global pandemic. While official figures may be misleading, I think it is already safe to say that many other states have failed more miserably with the handling of the pandemic, at least till now, than Turkey. With going a bit to focusing the future, which is very dangerous as we know, Erdogan has not managed to build up a successor. And it is likely that in Turkey's post-Erdogan, the battle for succession will be brutal. In general, I agree with those who think that a significant political change will occur from within the Justice and Development Party and not from the outside. Whereas the opposition in Turkey did manage to unite to a significant degree in the 2019 local election, the presidential and parliamentary elections scheduled now for 2023 are likely to be a different story. Obviously, it would be very important for Erdogan to win already in the first round of presidential elections. But if he doesn't, he may raise some issues of irregularities or fraud, as he did also in the local election, and force a sort of second first round that might be less of a humiliating option than a formal second round. But anyhow, at the end of the day, he will win. In the parliamentary elections, obviously, there is the issue of the high election threshold, which, as we already witnessed, is not a complete impasse for the pro-Kurdish party, but it is still an obstacle and still something that the pro-Kurdish party should be worried about. Most importantly, can we already envision a ruling political coalition that strongly relies on the pro-Kurdish party? Unfortunately, I do not think we are yet there. I say that with sorrow. Staying with the Kurdish issue, but going back to the regional level, Turkey has managed to stop for now what was a Kurdish momentum following the Arab upheaval. It should be mentioned that also the Arab upheaval didn't turn out to be the Arab Spring some people were hoping for. So I share, unfortunately, Alan's pessimism. However, if the US will withdraw its forces in Iraq to the Kurdish autonomous region, and there are signs that this might happen, and if Turkey's assertiveness will create such a backlash, which is already again happening, but we have to see where it gets to, and if it makes actors rethink their relations with Turkey, I wouldn't say that we are in the end of the story yet. And I'll stop here, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful opening remarks. I have a few questions, but I won't be selfish. I will address a couple questions that have been sent already, and then I will come back to my own questions, and then we will open the mic for our guests, starting from Dr. Azad Dewani. So the first question is from Dr. Kent. He's a prominent, actually, writer. His question is, the KRG has important economic relations with Turkey and seeks to maintain good diplomatic relations. The KRG has played an important role in the past in seeking to end conflict between the PKK and Turkey. What is the assessment of the panel of future possibilities for the KRG to do so again? In another word, playing a mediation between the Kurdish side and Turkey and Erdogan. Alan?
Sure. Well, I don't think right now that Turkey is very interested in mediation with the PKK. You know, as your extremely well-informed audience knows, Turkey has been pursuing intense military operations in Kurdistan, in the KRG, against the PKK, and has set up a number of actually dozens of semi-permanent military installations there. None of this suggests that Turkey is particularly interested right now in mediation. Moreover, look, it's a long discussion, but I think Erdogan feels that the peace process did not work out. I don't think he feels, I think he's primarily blameworthy, but he's not exclusively blameworthy. The PKK also shares a significant amount of blame for that. But what Erdogan found when he reversed course is that that was a political winner for him. And now that alliance with the MHP, which is in significant part an anti-Kurdish, certainly anti-PKK alliance, I think that's something he's going to hold on to dearly. So I'm not as aware of the KRG undertaking very intensive efforts for mediation, but I think they're not likely to bear much fruit if they do. I don't think that's where Turkey is going right now.
Thank you, Mr. Makovsky. Dr. Gallia, any thoughts on that?
I agree that the mediation is not very likely, but there is a question whether Turkey and the KRG can return to the relations before the referendum, which significantly caused the crisis between them. And I think there are indications that things are moving to more normality, that the sides are again discovering what brought them together before the referendum. But again, a major development would be if the US would decide to withdraw its forces into the KRG. And then I think we would hear maybe not exactly in the same level, but we will hear the same rhetoric that we heard about US cooperation with Kurds in Syria. We might hear also about US cooperation with the KRG, which might complicate matters.
Okay, and there's a quick question about Syria, which is a bit far from our topic, but we'll take it. I'll address it. It's how do you consider the U.S. recognition of Golan Heights of Israel will affect the actors in Syria? And Alan, can you have any thoughts on that?
Look, from where I sit, I don't see a great impact, but I think I'll defer to Gallia, who is geographically at least much closer to the situation than I am. So.
I think the Golan decision, the decision to recognize the Golan Heights did not have a major impact in the region. The move of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem had a greater impact. And probably the move that had the most impact is what we saw this month, on the 15th of September, and the signing of the Abraham Accords, which really is going to have a transformative effect on the region. Of course, it solidifies the already existing cooperation between Israel and the Gulf states, but still, the fact that it's out in the open now will mean that they can strengthen the cooperation between them. And it means these accords, they basically mean that every actor in the Middle East has to look at its policies, see if they fit the new reality. And it's no coincidence that Turkey was one of the states that condemned the Abraham Accords.
Thank you. Before I go back to a lot of, we have 5, 6 more questions in writings, but I will open the mic. We have 2 guests that raised their hands. First, Dr. Azad Dewani, and then Ms. Arazu. So, Dr. Azad, I'll open the mic. You can ask our guests. Please, go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me to this important event, and I am grateful to the insightful presentations of speakers. I have a kind of inquiry, you can say, a question related to Northeast Syria. And as you know, since October 2019, since the invasion, the Turkish jihadist invasion of Northeast Syria, the region has, Northeast Syria, you can say the whole northern Syria has become precarious, in the situation was more susceptible to further threats and attacks. The Kurdish and Christian population of the region are quite worried of another invasion by the Turkish military and jihadist groups, in collaboration this time with Russia, as it happened in Afrin in 2018. And as you are familiar with this violation that are happening currently in the area under the occupation of Turkey and the jihadist gangs against the Kurds, Yazidis, and Christians. And these are well documented in the report of 2020 by the UN Commission of Inquiry on Syria, and the statement, the last statement, September 2020, by the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights. And regarding to this concern, or related to this concern, just yesterday, Russia informed the SDF that they would withdraw from a military position located between the Christian town of Tel Tamr and the region occupied by Turkey and its jihadist groups. In addition, just before that, the Russians and Turkish troops conducted a military drill in Idlib, northwest Syria, which is under the control of jihadist groups, Al-Qaeda, Nusra groups. Turkey and Russia troops have also conducted their patrols in close to the Kobani and major Kurdish and Christian cities and towns, northeast Syria. This had created even further concerns among the population that Russia might play its collaborative game with Turkey during Christmas and New Year holidays and the transitional period of American presidency. My questions on concerns: do you see a new Turkish jihadist invasion into northeast Syria feasible in collaboration with Russia and Iran during the transitional period or holidays? The Christmas and New Year holiday. And is there a mechanism to call the US administration and Congress to pay attention to such a Turkish-Russian collaboration and to apply proper measures to prevent such invasion and subsequent massacres and displacements against Kurds and Christians?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Azadewani. Mr. Makovsky, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it, but I don't want to, just because I spoke first, I don't want to always usurp the first response.
Okay.
so I'm happy to defer to Gallia, and I have thoughts on this question too. If you'd like, Gallia.
No, thank you. You're very I would say 2 things. I understand. I understand the concerns, and of course, you have more intimate data on what is happening, and so the concerns must be very high. I would say two things. One is that I think the Russians, as we know, are playing a double game. It's not so clear that the Russians would allow Turkey to do things. They have the issues in Idlib. They have other concerns regarding Turkey. I'm not sure it will be that simple and smooth for the Turks. The other issue, and that was related to international attention, but in general, you see that the world is basically preoccupied by the corona pandemic, and it's hard to raise awareness to other issues. But looking backwards, basically Turkey conducted 3 operations in northern Syria. And you did see that the last operation did cause quite a lot of outcry in the international arena, and they did stop the Turks. That was before Corona, so I don't know if you can raise the same attention, but if there will be fears for what you are describing, I think it is possible to make the international community somewhat accountable. Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah. First of all, I completely agree with Gallia that Russia plays a double game. Russia certainly doesn't want to cut off its ties with the Kurds and specifically with the YPG. So I don't think Russia will welcome the Turks to just come in and take over what they haven't so far. As a matter of fact, the Turks originally understood that their agreement with Russia would allow them to go up to the Iraqi border. I mean, the agreement that they made following their agreement with the US following the October invasion. That hasn't happened, and that's because of Russian restraint. Now, regarding the transition in the US, yes, that is a time when people, if there is a transition, we don't know that yet. Obviously, President Trump could win a second term. It is a time when others can kind of catch the US unawares. In this case, however, I think in a second, if Trump were to win, there's more likelihood that the US will pull out of Syria entirely. And then I think, the chance at least to raise awareness in Washington is very much confined to the US Congress. And there's a lot that can be done in the US Congress regarding hearings and sanctions, but it's an animal that moves very slowly. And I think that that at least I hope policymakers will be keeping a very close eye on what Turkey might do in northeast Syria during that time. And yes, the UN report that you referred to that came out last week, I think it was, is very damning. And there have been, Turkey, which got a lot of credit and deserves a lot of credit for all of the refugees that it admitted in the early years of the war, has essentially closed that border since 2016. And there have been a lot of reports of people trying to Syrians trying to get into Turkey who have been handled very brutally and even shot by Turkish border guards. So and I know some of the Christians you referred to, as well as Kurds who live in that area. And I know there is a lot of paranoia, as you suggest. One positive development, I think, that the US has been able to affect a certain degree of rapprochement between the PYD and the KNC parties. At least there is some beginning to a all-party government, which I think is vital. It must happen if there is going to be some stability in that area. There's been some progress, of course, remains to be seen whether it will work out, but I'm glad the US was late, I think, getting involved in that regard, but at least now has been actively involved in mediating among the Kurdish parties and is doing well.
Thank you, which brings me to a question actually kind of related, and I'd like to go back to the Turkish foreign policy before opening mic to other guests. You talked about US's role in the Middle East. You both touched on it, but in case of US's under President Trump's, irrelevance to Middle East, to Iraq and Syria, and then he sometimes brings NATO as a replacement, but the NATO is fragile, and the only actor I think to deploy troops or ready to deploy troops instead of US would be Turkey. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, do you think that's something really more emotional talk or realistic talk?
To deploy troops in northeast Syria, you mean?
In just replacing US's role as a major player. Like, who would be willing to deploy troops within NATO other than Turkey? Is this something that the US really thinks about it? Because President Trump has, the administration did speak about having NATO replacing, eventually the US.
I think if we're talking about the, whether it's under a NATO rubric or not, if we're talking about the immediate area of the Turkish borders, if we're talking, which is Kurdish, predominantly Kurdish. Yeah, I think Turkey would be the likely state to step in. I'm not sure it would be necessarily under a NATO rubric. Now, there are, of course, other NATO states that have participated in this coalition. The French, the Brits, others. But without the US there, I think there would not be much of a NATO operation, a very effective one against ISIS. By the way, I just wanted to back up for 1 second to add one thing to Gallia's very comprehensive answer about the Israel-UAE agreement and its impact in Syria. I don't have a definitive answer, but I mean, one thing I would note is that the UAE sees Turkey as a rival and vice versa in many places in the region, and including in Syria. The UAE used to be on the other side of the issue, at least to a certain extent, but the UAE 2 years ago recognized the Assad government. And, I don't know what impact that would have. I don't know to what extent they would, their views will impact Israel's views on Syria. I mean, Israel, it seems to me, has had somewhat an equivocal approach to Syria. It's regarding who should govern there, but of course their primary focus has been the Iranian dimension in Syria. The UAE involvement with Syria, with the Assad regime, is certainly, I think, part of its anti-Turkish policy, and I don't see Israel being pulled in, but anyway, I would just note, since we mentioned the UAE, that Syria is an arena, not one of the hottest ones, but still an arena of UAE-Turkish rivalry.
Thank you. And Dr. Gallia, Erdogan must make some concession because there are a lot of pressures from a lot of different front lines. What would you think would be more reasonable for Erdogan to give up? Would it be the Eastern Mediterranean issue? Would it be Libya? Would it be relations with Israel? Because there are even involvement by Erdogan in even the Turkish side of Cyprus politics. And there are so many front lines that he opened up, but he must give up some to continue his survival. What do you think?
That's a very good question. For now, it doesn't seem that he was blocked by a major state actor. You could say the red line that Sisi gave him in Libya, don't go to Eastern Libya, was a way of blocking him, and for now the ceasefire is holding. I think the most interesting development in terms of foreign policy and a little bit of hesitation on the Turkish side has been the decision to not make the S-400 I mean, they probably tested it, but they decided not to. They should have in April made it active, and they decided to postpone that. That was the most, I think, significant postponed decision. Greece, I mean, for now we have a little bit of a relaxation of tensions because the ship went back, but it's already preparing to go again to what Greece sees as its economic inclusive zone. So in this respect, I would not yet be so hopeful.
Thank you. I'll open up the mic for Ms. Arazu. Please go ahead with your question. Ms. Arazu, I think you have to unmute.
You hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Yousif. Just I want to quickly go back to the question you raised for this panel. And I think the answer of the question whether expansionism is related, is not just related with the public opinion in Turkey or the ideological orientation of Erdogan or the attitude of the opposition parties and so forth, but also it is very much related with the reaction of the international community. And in that sense, I would really like to hear from the speakers, does, for instance, the US really concerned, you think, about Turkey's expansionist posture in the Middle East? Because we know very well without blessing Turkey's cross-border operations, Turkey would not be able to, enjoy or feel courage this much to feed its desires. So I just want to turn the lights on the other side and would like to hear your ideas on what is the reaction of the international community or particularly the US reaction to Turkey's expansionist posture in the Middle East?
An excellent question, Mr. Makovsky.
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I tried to allude to this a bit when I said that Erdogan's expansionism has taken place mainly during this period of what I call US benign neglect. Which basically, by which I basically mean that Trump, for the most part, has been very indulgent of Erdogan's moves. Now, there are some exceptions. The Trump administration has certainly strongly supported the Israel, Greece, Cyprus alignment. It has been critical of Turkey, particularly, I think, in the Hellenic arena. But in other areas, it has really been neglectful. Look, in Libya, I would say there were many policymakers who were pleased by Turkey's intervention because and there are even some who feel that Turkey's intervention was done with the US blessing because it was seen by many as counterbalancing Russia's involvement with Haftar. But in Syria, it seems to me the US has not taken a strong stand. And I think actually one of the more shameful and less publicized chapters in recent foreign history, US foreign policy history, that is, involved the October invasion. 3 times the US Secretary of Defense, Esper, had said it was unacceptable for Turkey to cross the border. And yet, when it came right down to it, and Turkey told President Trump that it was going in, the response was for the US to move its troops out of the way and let the US and let the Turkish troops come in. So yes, I think a more activist U.S. approach would make a difference. I think another thing, another element of this is human rights. The Trump administration does not raise human rights issues. I think human rights issues, aside from their intrinsic ethical dimension, are also an element of putting pressure on Turkey and other areas as well. So,
Dr. Gallia, any thoughts on that?
I completely agree with Alan that it's a mixed picture. And part of it is Trump's style, part of it is Trump's personal relationship with Erdogan. But part of it is also U.S. tendency to try to withdraw as much as it can from the Middle East, and it started with Obama. It's not just Trump, and I also suspect if there will be a new administration, the things that come into play with U.S.-Turkish relations, which is Turkey has a vital location. You always try to do some sort of reset with Turkey. There's the difficulties, and that stays the same. Alan gave many examples of the U.S. Ambivalent position. I will just add two. He mentioned the U.S. support of Israel-Greece-Cyprus relations, and it came also with the fact that U.S. did nothing to improve Israel-Turkey relations, which was exactly opposite of what the Obama administration tried to do. That's one example. And another example, again, is this brokering of the UAE-Israel and Israel-Bahrain agreement. This is profoundly something that Turkey sees with resentment, and it is, in a way, drawing of a red line for Turkey.
Okay, I would love for our panelists to speak about some the opposition alliances, but before that, I'll address a quick question and open the mic for Madame Sinam. One of the quick questions is how much of an Islamist is Erdogan? Please, his connection with Muslim Brotherhood, if panelists would address that. Any thoughts, Alan?
sure. Well, I think it's obvious he has a strong sentimental, if not organizational tie with the Muslim Brotherhood. He supported Hamas, for one thing. I quoted those opinion polls. There's no public demand for support for Hamas. His intervention in Libya, I think there was at least a component of Muslim Brotherhood concern that was clear. With the Morsi government in Egypt, his special focus on it, and to this day, his unwillingness to repair relations with Egypt, which is a key country. The fact that Turkey houses in Istanbul so many exiled Muslim brothers from around the Arab world, and actually allows Egyptian Muslim brothers to telecast on the internet from Turkey. I think, Erdogan sees himself as the leader of the Muslim world. He wants to be seen that way. He wants the street to see him that way if governments don't. And yes, I think that's very important too.
Dr. Gallia, do you have any thoughts to add?
I agree that in his heart, these things definitely matter to him, and that also in his policy, you see an aspect of that. But you should also look at the whole picture, which also means that he's promoting a very nationalist Turkish agenda. I would say sometimes more even national than Islamist. And also you should add that regional developments have also, in a way, pushed Turkey to be basically the leader of today's global Muslim and the global Muslim Brothers movement. And that is, of course, a source of concern for all the other countries because they see it as an internal threat in their countries. And that's something, I think part of it was what happened, the fall of Morsi and the rise of Sisi. But it's true that in today's Turkey, you cannot really conduct freely. So if these things are happening on Turkish ground, and for Israel, a source of concern is Hamas operating freely on Turkish ground, and the fact that Turkey gave Hamas operatives citizenship and passports. If these things are happening freely, that means the state does support them.
Thank you. Madam Sina Muhammad, a representative of the Syrian Democratic Council, would like to ask a question. I will enable her mic. Madam Sina, the floor is yours.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Allen. Long time we didn't see you because of Corona.
Right.
Sorry for that. And thank you for Dr. Gallia. I would like to thank you for Yousif and the Kurdish Washington Institute for organizing such a really panel and the topic, which is very important nowadays. Let me say now, Turkey really is playing a very, a big role, but not in solution for the Syrian crisis, in deepen the crisis in Syria. And this is what we are seeing by supporting the groups who are, radical groups, Muslim groups, and still supporting them in many violations happening in Afrin, in the occupied area like Nasrine and Tel Aviv and so on. All this Turkey is committing, in deepening the Syrian crisis. Do you think now everybody is talking about the solution to reach a political solution for the Syrian crisis after 10 years? Do you think now the United States is able to mediate between Turkey and the Kurds in Syria? Because always Turkey is accusing the Kurds of Syria and to be, relating to PKK or something like that. And for that, they are attacking them and they are occupying their land and so on. So do you think here the United States can mediate between Turkey and the Kurds in Syria so that we can reach a solution for all over Syria? And if yes, so how it should happen? And do you think that Turkey is ready for this thing now? Is it ready to have this, relation with the Kurds in Syria and to reach a solution for all over the Syrian crisis, So this is my questions to Mr. Allen and Dr. Gallia, and thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Sina. Wonderful to have you. It's an honor to have you with us today. Mr. Makovsky, please.
First of all, it's nice to hear your voice, Anam. It's, as you say, it's been a long time, and I hope you're managing and staying healthy during these challenging times. Look, I don't think that Erdogan is ready to make peace with the Kurds, make his peace with the Kurds of Syria. I think the U.S. is trying. I think one key step in that regard would be for some sort of all-party government to emerge in the Kurdish area. And of course, Turkey initially opposed the KNC coming to a rapprochement with the PYD, but it seems it's backed off of that. The U.S. is also, and you know more about this, Anam, than I do anyway, there is an American oil company involved there. I think there's a certain hope that northeastern Syria can follow the paradigm that the KRG followed, where an energy relationship with Turkey can soften Turkey and bring it along to some kind of acceptance.
Yeah, I think we. Alan, can you hear us? Yeah, I think we lost Alan. Hopefully he will rejoin. But
I can answer in the meanwhile.
yeah, yes, please.
I,
Dr.
I unfortunately also do not see a mediation role. I fear that Turkish presence in northern Syria is a long-term presence. I don't see them withdrawing soon. I hope there will be a modus vivendi that that the life of the local population will not be too much affected by this. But I think we should prepare for the scenario that Turkey will stay there. Here, I think it's less a matter of Erdogan. It's more a matter of traditional Turkish foreign policy and fears. If, from Turkish perspective, if Assad the father used this territory against Turkey, then why shouldn't Assad the son, which has a much more difficult relations with Erdogan, use the same? So I think the security concerns and also, of course, the domestic related issues of being in coalition with the nationalists will make it very hard for Turkey to withdraw from northern Syria.
Okay, there is an interesting question about post-Erdogan and whether the backing of extremist radical Islamist groups in Syria would continue or not, assuming that Erdogan is not in power. How will this likely change post-Erdogan? Mr. Paul is asking, please include assumptions of the nature in which Erdogan would be no longer in power.
Some policies will continue, and but I think regarding this issue, I think there's already a rethinking in Ankara, because again, if they stay there for the long term, their interest also in encouraging extreme groups that might at one point act against them is less appealing. So I think that's where it is. The thing about the post-Erdogan scenario is not necessarily that his policies will not have a long-term effect. The question is, when will the Turkish political space open for more diverse opinions to be voiced? When that happens, that will have a positive effect on the Turkish policies. I mean, there will be a momentum and things will continue. And part of this, again, is nationalist, traditional nationalist Turkish policies. It's not very different from previous leaders. But now the political space, or let's say the public space is narrow and closed. And once in the post-Erdogan, and once hopefully this will not be, I'm not sure this will be a pretty picture in the immediate term after Erdogan, but let's say when things relax a bit, this opening of the public space will enable new voices.
Okay, thank you. Welcome back, Alan.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
We missed you, but we have a lot of questions for you. We will take a few more minutes from you both times. We have Madame Aviva Stein asking both of you, how do you see the potential outcomes of the US elections affecting Turkey's role in NATO and as a strategically located ally? Alan?
Okay. Well, my guess is, actually, as Gallia said, I think Turkey will continue to be appreciated for its strategic location. And I think that even a Biden administration, look, there are a couple of wild cards here. I mean, Trump himself has not exactly been the most pro-NATO president the US has ever had. And in a second term, when he is unburdened by the need to be reelected, I'm not sure what exactly the future of NATO itself will be. But that being said, and Biden has been very critical of Turkey, particularly on human rights. He's called Erdogan an authoritarian. But I think it's likely he's a classic foreign policy thinker, and it's likely that he will continue to see Turkey as a geostrategic asset, and it will play out that way within NATO.
Dr. Gallia?
I would just add that you rarely see, I mean, whereas when you see statements of Turkish formal officers against the EU and to reconsider the EU membership, you don't hear the similar voices, official against NATO. NATO doesn't have its mechanism to kick out a member. So the question is whether Turkey would want to withdraw. And my feeling is it's not there yet. As I said, I don't hear the official statements in this direction, and the postponement of the activation of the S-400 maybe is also an indication that they're still a little bit careful, although they already moved too far in this direction. So that's what we'll have to see. But if you start hearing these voices that we should leave NATO, again, in the official level, what the public, what's in media, and it's important, but I'm going to listen to the officials here. If you will see that, a true Turkish act to leave NATO, that's the litmus test. That means that Turkey is exactly the revisionist actor the other actors in the Middle East and other global actors are thinking it is.
If I could just add, I completely agree with Gallia. I see no possibility that Turkey would voluntarily leave NATO. It derives immense benefits from NATO, from its association with the top militaries in the world, and I suspect that its ability to develop its own military industries is in no small part the result of its association with NATO and the top military industries of some of the NATO countries. And in addition to all of that, I think Turkey knows it derives considerable prestige in the Middle East itself from the fact that it is a member of this very powerful Western club and is able to influence it. Could I just quickly add on to Sanam's question, because I got cut off?
Yes,
I did want to say that because of the nationalist direction of Turkish foreign policy that Gallia articulated so effectively, it's hard for me to see Turkey reaching some kind of rapprochement with northeast Syria. However, were it to do so, and this is where I find the polls interesting, it is certainly something that could be sold to the Turkish public as long as that border were quiet. It's a good horse to flog politically because it's anti-PKK. So Erdogan, MHP, and even CHP use it to a certain extent. But a policy of rapprochement could also be sold if a Turkish government were so inclined. Thank you.
Thank you, but I would like still for our expert to have a closing remark. And during closing remark, could you speak about what's the best scenario? Because we didn't talk much about inside Turkey's politics, about the opposition groups. What would be the best way to create alliances and maybe to include the HDP for the upcoming election and prepare from now? And we know Erdogan pulls all these strings, including allying with MHP. Is it possible that Erdogan will bring others to the alliances, like AY, which is ideologically very closer to MHP than the Kurds? And just overall, if you could just briefly think that the expansionism policy by Erdogan, eventually, if they get to an agreement to these neighboring states, Eastern Mediterranean, where is the energy, at least they think, would bring benefit for Turkey. I mean, at least they will have an agreement and get a piece of it. Do you think that's the case here? Dr. Gallia, maybe you start your closing remarks and we'll come back to Mr. Makovsky.
So with regard to your first question, what would be a positive outcome? So as I said in my opening remarks, I think if change will happen, it will happen from within the Justice and Development Party. And we see already parties that are forming from ex-Justice and Development Party people. Now let's make a scenario that these parties gain enough momentum that on the one hand, they don't completely threaten Erdogan rule, but on the other hand, he can put them as coalition partners. And that will mean maybe he can drop the nationalists. I mean, I'm being optimist here, but that maybe means that he can drop the nationalists, the MHP. And that, in a way, might cause a relaxation in this respect. With regard to the Eastern Mediterranean, I'm not so hopeful at the moment about reaching an agreement. I think this, on the one hand, it's a great, I mean, from an international relations scholar perspective, this alliance against Turkey is like a classical alliance theory, and it's really impressive. But it has also its negative elements in causing, as I said, Turkey to have a threat perception to only grow and making it more assertive instead of making it less assertive. So that's one thing that worries me. The other thing that worries me is that the differences of views between Turkey and Greece and Turkey and Cyprus are things, first of all, they have been discussed in the past, and not with regard to Cyprus, we've seen many trying and not reaching a solution. And Turkey, Greece, with all the issues of the island, it's not a simple thing to solve, even if you have goodwill, and I'm not sure the sides currently have goodwill. Thank you, and thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Gallia. Mr. Makovsky.
Yeah, well, to take the questions in reverse order, I think that there isn't much prospect of some kind of rapprochement among the players in the Eastern Med. I think for there to actually be such a rapprochement, you'd have to have a settlement of the Cyprus problem, and just not in the cards. So on the issue of the alliances, which are now, well, the alliance, because Turkey isn't really in one, I guess, except with Qatar. I mean, although we call it an alliance, and they themselves have called it an alliance, at least the Israelis, Greeks, and Cypriots have, it's not a NATO-type alliance. None of those countries can assume, or even, I think, have good reason to believe that were they to be attacked by Turkey, that any of their other partners would come to their assistance. So I think a continuation of Turkey's assertiveness while others try to block Turkey diplomatically is the most likely result. Regarding the Kurds, you know, one advantage the Kurds have, to the extent Turkey, that Turkey can be a democratic country, or at least in which elections make a difference, is that the Kurds are gaining demographically. And I think that is one of the reasons they were able to have some impact in the local elections. I remember hearing a scholar, this was 35 years ago, speaking at the Middle East Studies Association. He was a Kurdish demographer. And he said that by the year 2050, he said Kurds would be the majority, he claimed, in the Republic of Turkey. And he finished by saying, so you see, in order for the Kurds to ultimately achieve their dream, they need not make war, only love. So I think there is a demographic advantage. I think there has been a certain softening in CHP, which a liberalizing. It's a little less nationalistic than it used to be. But these are trends that would have to play out over many, many years. And for the immediate future, I think virtually every party in Turkey, all of the major parties, AK Party, MHP, CHP, EE Party, they all line up very nationalistically when it comes to the Kurdish issue. So it's going to take some time yet before we see those positive developments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Makovsky and Dr. Lindenstrauss. We are honored again to have you both. Sadly, Seth was called for an important duty, so he couldn't make it, but hopefully we will host him in a next webinar. But again, thank you for everyone for being with us. Great questions. We still didn't address a good 5 or 6 of them, but we'll save it for future events. Thank you, everyone, and we hope you'll join us again in the future webinars.
Thank you so much, and thank you to
Have a
WK.
wonderful day.
Stay safe.
Thank you.